Welcome to the Divine Identity Podcast. In this video, we're looking at Igor's article, The Word, Eternal Life, and the Meaning of Pros. To unpack Igor's insights in this explainer, we're going to use an anatomy to action framework. So we'll start with the divine anatomy of the one God, decode the meaning of the Greek word pros, explore the word becoming flesh, and then finally clarify a few of the more complex concepts. Okay, let's dive into this first section by establishing Igor's core framework of the one divine spirit being. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the shared Greek word pros highlights a parallel between the word and eternal life without introducing two eternal divine persons. John 1:1 tells us the word was pros theon, toward God, but over in 1 John 1:2 it says eternal life was pros ton patera, toward the Father. Igor points out that this parallel actually brings two distinguishable realities into view, both standing in relation to a personal center, while totally retaining their proper place within the one God. To really make sense of these complex texts, Igor's article builds upon a scriptural framework known as aspectual monotheism. Now, what is that? Well, it reveals God as one complete divine spirit being. He acts both internally and externally, but, and this is absolutely crucial, he's not divided into separate persons. Instead, there's this beautifully ordered distinction within the one living God. Let's look at the three key aspects of this divine anatomy. First up, we have the divine soul. Igor explains that soul identifies the personal core, the ultimate identity, the divine I within that one spirit being. So whenever you see the pronouns he, him, or his, this is the reality they correspond to. The Father is this one active personal subject. He is the divine soul who thinks, wills, loves, and acts throughout John's entire prologue. He's the personal center who has life in himself. Next, we have God's form, identified as the Logos, or the Word. So the crucial point is that Logos isn't an independent divine agent, but God's own outward-facing form through which he acts. You can think of it as God's eternal personal living structure. When the divine soul creates, reveals himself, or brings his structure into flesh-coming action, it's always through this form. The word proceeds through this structure, kind of like a spoken word proceeds through a mouth. Finally, we have the inner spirit, identified as life. Igor's article distinguishes God's inner spirit as his own inward life, his vitality, and his life-giving power. And here's the kicker. This spirit life lives and operates in God's form. It belongs entirely to the divine soul, giving immense power to literally everything the Father accomplishes through his form. Let's move to our next section and see how this builds into the true meaning of pros, or toward. Igor argues that this shared Greek word, pros, expresses a real relation, a proper orientation, and an inseparable coherence. So it's not describing some spatial arrangement of two beings staring at each other across a room, right? Instead, it points to an inward order. It describes distinguishable realities converging on the exact same personal center, the divine soul. To see this inward order in action, just consider Psalm 33:6. God himself remains the active subject here. He creates. But notice how his word and his breath move together, inseparably, right within him. Igor's article also references 2 Samuel 22:16, which uses really similar language of breath and nostrils to show this exact same inward order. The divine soul acts by the power of his inner spirit through his own personal living structure. And this just beautifully clarifies our two verses from John. Igor explains that pros ton theon and pros ton patera simply describe different orientations within the one divine spirit being. The word approaches the divine soul from the outward-facing side of God's personal living structure. Eternal life, on the other hand, approaches from the inward side of God's own spirit life. But they both move toward the exact same personal center. Now that we understand the anatomy and the relational orientation, let's transition to applying this to the physical world and the history of Jesus Christ in our third section, the Word becoming flesh. To really grasp the incarnation, Igor's article actually takes us all the way back to the Genesis 2:7 pattern of human emergence. It's a very precise biblical formula. God forms a physical element, God gives a spiritual element, marked by the breath of life, and boom, through their union, a real, living human soul emerges. Igor explains that Jesus comes into being through this exact, genuine human pattern. Let's look at how that Genesis pattern maps perfectly onto Jesus. Step 1, Mary provides the physical constituent element. Step 2, God gives his own form, designated as the Word in flesh-coming action, as the non-Adamic spiritual constituent element. Step 3, Jesus Christ emerges as a real human soul being. And this brilliantly illustrates the incarnation. God's living structure enters the coming into being of flesh without replacing Jesus' human personal reality. Jesus has a true human mind, will, and awareness. This brings us to a really profound verse, John 5:26. Igor highlights how this verse gathers the entire pattern together. The Father is the eternal source, right? He has life in himself because God's inner spirit belongs to the divine soul. But the Son has life in himself entirely through the Father's giving. God's inner spirit lives and operates through his own form, meaning the life belonging to the Father is now fully present and active in the Son. All right, let's head into our final section, clarifying the concepts, to tackle some common theological objections Igor addresses in his explainer. When you present a framework this detailed, questions naturally arise. One really crucial question Igor addresses is this: does the word becoming flesh mean that God's form somehow divided, changed, or became spatially confined inside a human body? Well, Igor's answer is a resounding no. He explains that God gives his form from the absolute fullness of his unconfined divine life. His form remains eternally whole, completely unaltered, and completely inseparable from the divine soul. It truly serves as the spiritual element in the emergence of the Son, establishing a real ontological union of God and man and allowing God and Jesus Christ to genuinely dwell among us. Now, another common misconception is confusing this framework with modalism. But the distinction here is absolutely vital. You see, modalism suggests God is just wearing temporary, changing masks or playing different roles. Aspectival monotheism, however, is about simultaneous, eternal distinction. Igor's article differentiates these super clearly. Form and spirit aren't temporary appearances. They are eternal realities that remain distinguishable without ever being separated from the one divine soul. And because Jesus is a real human soul being with a genuine human personal I, his relation to the Father is a true relation. When Jesus says, "The Father who dwells in me does his works," he is uniquely expressing the life of the Father. His prayers, his obedience, they reveal a true relation between God as the eternal source and the real human Son in whom the Father's life is fully active. The Word was toward God. Eternal life was toward the Father. Both reveal real distinction and inseparable coherence within the one divine spirit being, as God himself acts by his inner spirit through his own form and makes his life visible in the real human Son, Jesus Christ.